Morning, everybody. Morning, panel. I am so excited to be here. When Michelle Sklar asks you to moderate a panel at EIW, you jump, because especially when you work in research partnerships like I do. So my name is Karen Chu, as Chang says. I'm an Innovation Partnerships Manager at Innovation UBC within the VPRI, and I'm so excited to have experts here from all manner of the research to action pathways, because we work on impact pathways within the office. So I'm so glad to have all of you here. I'm going to introduce them yet again, even though Chang already did. To my right, we've got Aislinn Sirk, your Research Partnerships and Innovation Manager at the University of Victoria's Industry Liaison Office. And before Aislinn became a lawyer and manages all things IP, licensing, and commercialization at UVic, she had an entire career as an electrochemist. So welcome, Aislinn. I can't wait to hear your stories. Next to her, we've got Simon Donner. Simon is a professor of geography at the University of British Columbia. And you're a scientist, and you're a climate scientist, and from your website with a sub-focus on marine science and policy. Can't wait to hear about your stories and how you're here, Simon. Thank you for being here. And then right at the end, we've got Alison Shaw. Alison, you're the Executive Director of Simon Fraser University's inaugural, brand new, May of this year, Community-Centered Climate Innovation Initiative. I'm going to let you talk about that a little bit more, but you also hold appointments as the Executive Director of the Action on Climate team. So welcome, all of you. So I think I've done a little bit of introduction as to who these people are, but those are just their credentials. And I thought what I'd like to do is have you introduce yourself by, we're here to talk about research impact. So if you could tell us your personal journey on how you came to, first of all, what research impact means to you and how you arrived here and also here on this panel. So whoever's ready, you can pick up the microphone that hopefully is next to you or on your butt. And yeah, please. Alison's ready.
Hello?
Yes.
There we are. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Alison Shaw. I'm really excited to talk about these themes as I've been working in research to impact areas for over 20 years now. Initially as an academic at UBC, leading large-scale interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary projects, looking at collaborative opportunities to move climate action into practice. And so impact to me really is about moving climate knowledge, resources, and tools into practice and changing practices, changing mindsets, changing organizations. And so the way that I have come to this was initially as a PhD student investigating science policy interactions in the third assessment report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and recognizing the soupy mix between how evidence is taken up by policymakers and decision makers. And really kind of investigating that at the international scale made me realize that that's one place to act, but the place that I felt more capable of influencing action was at regional and local scales. So my career has been building and fostering interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary research projects with strategic partners in government, private sector, indigenous communities and leadership, as well as stakeholder groups such as NGOs and equity-seeking groups. And I came to a place in academia where I realized that the knowledge and the tools and the resources largely exist for action. What the barrier is the way that our organizations function and the types of decision-making and leadership we have in our organizations. So I started a consulting company called Flipside Sustainability to really start mobilizing all of that knowledge and resources and tools into particularly regional and local governments. And so the emphasis of that in terms of impact has been thinking strategically about how to help governments reduce risks and vulnerabilities to climate change while also reducing emissions, and using climate action as a strategic opportunity to link to sustainability, innovation, and to be a critical piece of the transition to sustainability. So now at the Community-Centered Climate Innovation Program at SFU, I will be using those ideas and those tools to foster relationships with strategic partners, and that's it for me.
It's going to be a busy year for you, Alison. Thank you so much. Simon, did you want to share your story?
Thank you. Thanks, and thanks, Alison. So again, my name's Simon Donner, and I am a climate scientist at UBC. And when I was deciding whether to go to graduate school and do a PhD or not, I had this sort of existential debate. I was interested in climate change. I happened to be good at math and physics, and it felt like a good way to apply the one set of skills that I seemed to possess towards something that was important to the planet and important to people. But I was torn. Should I go and do research on the subject and work like as a scientist or a professor or something, which is one path to a PhD, or should I work in like communications or journalism or film or something where we could tell the stories? I had that debate basically when I was 25, and now another 25 years later, I'll tell you that I have not resolved the answer to that question. I made a choice, which you have to do, but I never really resolved the question, and instead it kind of just got embedded in my career. So I went off and did a PhD in atmospheric and oceanic sciences, and then when I graduated, I got the chance to work as like a postdoctoral associate, so just as a scientist, but I was in a public policy school working with other climate scientists, but a whole bunch of people, lawyers, economists, et cetera. And although my research was on the science side, there's the osmosis from being around all those other people. And so by the time I moved back to Canada and came here to Vancouver to work at UBC, I'd kind of made a choice that, well, I think you can kind of do both. And what I concluded was that the reason I went and did this in the first place and did the degree was because I do enjoy research, I do enjoy teaching, and I do enjoy trying to solve scientific problems. But that I also knew that if I wanted to talk about it and try to have some sort of an impact, I needed to have credibility. And the credibility was in my own eyes. I needed to feel like I deserved to be in the room talking about it. And so then from then, I'll just say from my own career, I am evidence that the old idea that to be successful as an academic and to be promoted, you have to just publish papers, that you can't do other things. Because I've done other things the whole time, and the university always liked it. Right? So I think that old idea has actually died a lot, more than people realize. And so over the years, my work evolved from doing the science to try to say, how can we use our science to answer policy questions? How can we train students to do this and give seminars on it and everything? And two things in the past few years have come as a result of that. One was that I was then asked to be sort of the climate scientist on this federal advisory body on what the country can do to get to net zero, and that's been a fantastic opportunity for me to learn a lot about what transformational change really is at the government and the policy level. But the other thing was, in doing that work, looking at the university and realizing there's so many people interested in climate change now at UBC. Almost every faculty member, almost every research group on some level is thinking about climate change. And when I started, it was basically 20 people. And now there's like really thousands. And most of us are working on them in different faculties, different disciplines, and there's some collaborations and everything, but it's confusing. And so we pitched to the university in the follow-up to the climate emergency declaration that we need some sort of center, but there's too many people to put in a center. And so instead we said, what about making kind of like a web that goes on top? Instead of saying everybody goes in a center, why don't we create something, we call it a collective, because this is a collective action problem, just to coordinate people around campus, raise the profile of stuff for the university, which of course they like, but also to just get people talking to each other and to try to inspire work towards solutions. Because one of the things I've discovered in talking to students and other faculty over the years, because I'm sort of, my professional life is, climate change is really at the center of it, people come to me all this time saying, I want to do something, but I'm just not sure what it is. And so we need some sort of, and this is what we're trying to do with this Solutions Collective, a way to basically do some speed dating and matchmaking, to get people talking to each other across campus, but also to draw in people who are wanting to have an impact and do work on solutions, research, have an impact on, in the outside world, but don't even know how to start. They probably have skills and knowledge, that are useful, but they don't even know how to get started. And we're hoping just by bringing people together, that'll start to happen a little bit more. And so that's this initiative that I'm here partly to talk about this week. And for those of you that are going to be at UBC's main campus on Friday, we have an event, a launch event at noon, and I encourage you all to come. You can just sign up at climatesolutions.ubc.ca. Thank you.
So entrepreneurial, plugs at the end of his tour. So I love it. Thank you. Aislinn, please tell us about your story. Thank you.
All right. Hello, everybody. So I am not a researcher now. I work in research partnerships with a specialization in patents and intellectual property related to science and engineering. And our office works a lot on what I call the nuts and bolts of making partnerships happen. So initial introductions, NDAs, grant support, contracts, more contracts, patent evaluations, licenses, everything that makes partnerships happen and ties them together. However, before I became involved in all of this part of it, I was actually a researcher, and I'm very excited to talk about that little bit of past, because I had a double major in chemistry and environmental studies. I also went to graduate studies, and I plan to save the world through coming up with a more efficient catalyst for fuel cells. I failed. I think everything's become batteries, not fuel cells. I then went on and did a postdoc where I melted down rocks to make oxygen, which is a carbon-free way of making steel. And I think that had a little more success after I left. And then I came back to Victoria and, as I mentioned, got a law degree, and now I end up working in research partnerships. And I'm happy to talk about any of the amazing ways that researchers can move things from the lab or the research institute or the policy into action, into the outside world, and also how partners outside come and engage with the university and pull out that information. And all of those happen in really neat ways. I think I'm just going to talk about sort of the biggest thing that is sort of burning up my desk right now, which is ASET, which is accelerating community energy transformations. And this is launching this fall, sort of has already launched. It's 7 years, $80 million for creating tidal and wave energy in remote communities. And it ties into community. There's a huge community section associated with this, and research, and climate change, self-sufficiency, and collaboration. Working with multiple other universities and about 40 partners for that. So there's one example coming out of UVic.
Thanks so much, you guys. I have a section of questions I wanted to ask about partnering, but I see there's going to be some fantastic stories on partnering from all of your stories. So thank you so much for that. So we're here because you all believe in action. You've referred to that several times in your personal journey stories, and that acknowledging that there are multiple pathways to action. Could you share a story of how this action has happened in your work, in your personal journeys? Like how are their pathways, and how have you watched it or implemented yourself? Alison?
Sure.
Yeah.
So this kind of builds on the narrative that I just shared about impact, to me, really being more systemic thinking about climate action. So often climate action in the discourse has been focused on reducing emissions. And it's only recently that we've started to realize that it should also mean focusing on reducing climate risk and climate vulnerabilities. And so for the past 20 years, I've been kind of showcasing that if we look at the opportunities to reduce climate risk and vulnerability and emissions at the same time, which have traditionally been done in silos in the decision-making realm, that we can really leverage larger scale innovation to help promote communities and different public and private sector organizations toward their net zero carbon reductions, as well as building resilience. So these are the two things that we have to think about moving forward with climate action. And through the Action on Climate team at SFU, we have called this particular approach the low carbon resilience planning and decision-making approach. And we've applied new criteria in local government contexts to help decision makers think through different priorities, whether it's an investment priority or a land use planning priority or procurement or governance, to always ask the question, does this reduce climate risks? What types of risks? How does it build the social and adaptive capacity of the community so that you're building resilience over time to projected climate impacts? And how does it reduce emissions? And by doing this, we've had tremendous impact in local governments starting to integrate climate action as part of their decision-making criteria. And I could go on and on about the different types of impact that that's had and outcomes that that's had. But one of the primary things that...
Give us one example.
Well, procurement. So, for instance, when local governments plan for climate change, they often procure mitigation specialists to help them evaluate their transportation, housing, and waste to better understand opportunities to reduce emissions. We're saying, why not encourage collaboration between climate professionals and scientists to get them talking about strategic opportunities to reduce emissions while also adapting and building resilience. And so this has been a really seminal change in practice in the professional realm and change in decision-making practice in local governments, starting in BC, but moving across Canada. And just yesterday, I found out that the Federation of Canadian Municipalities is using our framing and our model to actually frame the criteria for funding for local governments on climate action moving forward. So that's a huge win because they are the primary funding arm for local governments from the federal government.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to skip over you. You thought I was going to come to you? I'm going to come right to Aislinn. I'm going to mix it up. Aislinn, please.
Okay, I'll do an entirely different example. Yeah. Let's do, I'm going to go with a pure tech transfer example with a local UVic startup.
That's also a pathway that we love.
Yeah, this is where a professor developed a technology, brought it to our office, and it was a method to do construction using less concrete. As you might know, cement production involves a lot of CO2 emissions. And so if you can use less concrete and make it last longer, that's great. And so we filed the patent, took that through the patent prosecution process that if anyone knows about is long and kind of arduous. And then we now have a nice successful spin-off, Setu, and it's got several pilot projects out there laying down the concrete and selling its product, which will reduce climate impact with help from some nice protectable IP. And so there's one simple tech transfer, traditional tech transfer from a university.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Aislinn. Simon.
Thanks. Fantastic. You know, as coming from a scientist and somebody that works on policy a little bit, for me, so much of solving climate change is making sure that we've set the enabling conditions right so that the inventions and things coming out of universities can go to market, and so that the individual person, people sitting in this room are incentivized to buy those things rather than the more polluting things, right? And so my experience is more in the policy realm, and I want to give you an example of where we need to be thinking entrepreneurial. It's not exactly quite a solution. It's not quite a problem that's been solved yet. But, you know, right now, the fourth largest source of emissions in Canada are buildings, so residential and commercial buildings, your homes, buildings like this, et cetera. And most of that is from heating and cooling them. right, which we largely use natural gas in Canada. But the alternative technology exists. We have district energy system here in Vancouver, and there are heat pumps, which is old technology that's always worked and would be great because it reduces climate risk. Both gives you heating and gives you air conditioning, right, gives you cooling. But this is a struggle at the federal level to change the building sector. The projections, according to the 2030 emissions reduction plan for Canada, is banking on a very large reduction from the building sector. And I'll say, because I'm on an advisory body to the minister, and they know we say this, it's like, how are you going to accomplish this with the existing policies? It just doesn't make any sense.
I can confirm that changing building policies is really difficult.
So there we go. So I'll give you an example then.
It's another project.
So last year, last November, I was in Ottawa for a meeting of our advisory body. We normally work virtually, but once or twice a year we meet in person. And we also had a big federal conference to present our advisory body, another climate institute, all presenting on work. And buildings was going to be one of the subjects on one of the panels. And the night before, I was standing in front of the hotel getting a breath of fresh air because I was nervous about the talk I had to give because I had found out 10 minutes earlier that the Prime Minister was speaking after me. No one told me before that. And I bumped, there's a guy out there having a smoke, and he's like, "You here for the meeting?" And I was like, "Yeah, what meeting are you here for?" He's like, "Oh, I'm with the Net Zero Home Builders." I'm like, "Oh, are you coming to our conference tomorrow?" He's like, No, we're meeting in the hotel." I was like, "Wait, you have a meeting of net zero home builders in this hotel, and across the street we're having a net zero conference?" It was just a coincidence. And so we got to talking, and we had a drink, and we talked a little bit, and he was telling me about all the challenges they have with federal policy. And when it comes down to it, contractors like him are often not taking federal rebates because of technical challenges about when the money's offered. That means the contractor has to carry the money, and they don't want to have to do it. And it was just one of those examples of where we're trying to put the policies into place. We think we have the enabling conditions, but we're not partnering enough to really realize. And so to me, it was realizing that the builders weren't at the conference talking about the policies we need to be solving. Whereas, to be honest, the suggestions that this gentleman I talked to had were better than anything I heard at the conference the next day. And so to me, that's an example of how we need to partner because the solutions are just sitting there.
That seamlessly, Simon, thank you for sharing that. But that seamlessly leads us to like our next thing, which is about partnering. All of you talked about all the different partners that are necessary to make something like this work beautifully. So, Aislinn, I'd like to start with you. You said partnering is important, and you also said, I asked them in our little pre-panel chat, like, what do we want the audience to go away with? And they're like, yeah, connecting is big, partnering is big. So can you tell us about partnering with institutions, partnering with industry?
So I am in the Office of Research Partnerships, and so we really like partnering. Partnering is huge for the universities. It's where, to be honest, from the university point of view, it's where a ton of funding comes from, it's where a ton of publications come from, it's where a ton of real impact comes from. So reaching out to partners, good partners, and finding things where needs overlap is key to, I think, any good academic research, and companies should understand this and want to partner with the universities in the specific ways that work for them. And it's nice to have, here's my key thing on partnering, have the tough conversations early. Once you've got an overlap in interests, make sure that both parties going into it know what they want out of it. If somebody wants to commercialize it, be open about that, be clear about that, get that in writing. That's me. We can negotiate almost any contracts as long as both the PIs, that's principal investigator, in the university side, and the external partners are in agreement, and it fits within the general funding criteria. But talking to people, talking to universities is great. If you have no idea where to go and you want to partner with the university, every single university has a research partnership office. And we love to hear from people that have ideas, are interested in partnering, or you can always reach out to professors that you're interested or research criteria on your own. So, and like I said, have the tough conversations early. Don't worry about scaring off a partner. Just see what you both want out of it.
Amazing. And just when you say that, it brings me back to one of the first things I learned as a mentor for entrepreneurship at UBC, which is like having that conversation where you say in a way, what's in it for me? What's in it for you? Let's make sure there's something in it for all of us. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, that is
Cool.
very clear. I think
Yeah.
sometimes people feel that's a little bit selfish. It isn't. You want to make sure that your interests overlap and align in a way that both people get something out of whatever you're going into together.
Thank you. Alison, do you have anything to share about partnering with community?
Oh, yes.
Getting them on, yes.
Yes, lots of examples about partnering with community, but I think what I will share is twofold. Just on this low carbon resilience planning and decision-making criteria approach, we partnered initially with the city of Port Moody on pioneering that along with 9 other municipalities. But we've maintained a partnership with the city of Port Moody, who is now recognized as a leader in climate action across Canada. And part of that longevity in partnership has built the trust between the senior leadership team in the city. Changing election cycles have brought different councils and mayors in who recognize the trust with SFU and our team. And so we continue to partner to push best practice. And right now, what we're working on is nature-based solutions and how to apply coherent and systemic nature-based solutions within a community context, which we hope to develop as best practice that will roll out across Canada once again. So that's one example of just establishing rapport, building a long-lasting partnership that can actually lead to best practice that, you know, inspires other jurisdictions. The other partnership that's really exciting at SFU, and I'm just talking about 2. There's like many, is a partnership between some of Canada's leading hydrogen scientists at SFU and the city of Burnaby and some technology companies working on hydrogen. And so what we've just developed is we just received $25 million from Pacifican for a hydrogen hub. And part of that partnership is bringing research and practitioners together, but also the city of Burnaby as a partner through something that we're calling the Civic Innovation Lab at SFU, where we can apply hydrogen test examples and pilot projects in the city of Burnaby to de-risk the technology, to refine it, to work on it, to figure out what will work into the future. And part of the really exciting piece of that is not just hydrogen buses for transportation and hydrogen vehicles, but also repurposing existing piping and infrastructure to mobilize hydrogen in as part of a significant supply chain shift.
That sounds amazing and sounds very very aligned and in parallel with the shed coming up at UBC. So amazing, amazing. Simon, I've just been given the 1-minute sign, but you know, we'll just roll right over that. There's time for the Slido. Exactly. Yeah, we'll just roll right over.
Well, so
yeah.
then in that 1 minute, I'm going to summarize all of the climate partnerships going on at UBC. There's too many. I'm not even going to try. I'll say the one thing about partnerships. I think when I started as at UBC and sort of as a professor, the idea of like if you wanted people from different fields and from off campus to work together, you just got them all together in a room, and but that's being cross-disciplinary. That's not being interdisciplinary. And the thing I've learned over the years, if you want to partner with people, whether it's a bunch of researchers in other fields or whether it's people from different walks of life, private sector, business, public sector, NGOs, et cetera, you have to put some effort in to understand how their business works. And it's the same thing in my world. I'm able to do research that balances between climate, marine science, and policy, because I learned a little bit about each of them, even though my core understanding is in one field. And if I only did the climate research and then walked in and pretended I could be helpful for policy, I wouldn't be helpful, right? And so that's the big thing I've learned. And all of the partnerships I've seen that have been successful, it's because the people involved put in the effort to say, well, I understand what this person's trying to get out of it. And that includes our work at the policy level. You know, we think about, well, I have to think about sometimes what would actually make, the minister's not going to announce something that's going to make them look bad, right? So you have to think about everybody's motivations, right?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. We're going to, I can see why all the other moderators have just turned around because I don't have my reading glasses. Okay, so the first question, this person put their name. I like it when the person puts their name on it because we've only had like anonymous questions so far. So the first question from Elena, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, is how can we help the global innovation community adopt the concept of spaceship Earth? I hope you guys know what that means because I don't. In view of limited resources, how can we manufacture reusable technology? Anybody want to take a stab at this? Alison?
Yeah, I think this is the skill testing question, right?
Yes.
This
Elena knows.
this is what we're all working toward exactly. But I think part of what your question is getting at is the concept of thresholds, and the fact that the way that our technology system, our societies, our innovation systems have operated is beyond the thresholds of our planet, and so beyond the concept of limited resources. And I think the real opportunity for innovation is building in thresholds right from the front end, and recognizing that we have to do more with less, and that we have to reuse, as you say. And I see this as the real innovation opportunity for both the public and private sectors.
Yeah, I'm going to say one of the biggest things is just the policy driving it. I think that the pure researchers developing the technology, who can make reusable technology, who can make more efficient things, researchers will do the research if there's funding and interest. And it's really the policy and the economics to drive it, both putting money in the front end to start the research and then having an economy that embraces those technologies. And the innovation will follow. People can do amazing things.
I'm loving hearing this because there's some very clear themes coming up, surfacing from all you've talked about. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Partnering is so important, and research will prove itself, but nothing gets adopted until you have the support of external factors such as market pull and government support for adoption.
Yeah, and to make that personal, you know how I mentioned that like the fuel cell thing didn't work, but that's the hydrogen economy. That was one of the broken bits, is that storing hydrogen is very difficult. It's explosive and light, and it's hard to get a nice density of energy there.
There's the electrochemistry. Okay, so the next question, this got 3 votes from Anonymous. So Simon's net zero building story highlights, oh my word, an ignorance by the government of the needs of their customers being, I guess, the citizens, and residents. How do we help the government to value customer discovery? So this references your net zero, but I think any of us can take a stab at this. How do we help the government value customer discovery?
I'll do a simple one. Vote and complain.
I'm going to add to the vote and complain. Voting, absolutely. But trust me on this because I speak to people in government. Government hears from the extremes on sides of most issues, and they do not hear from most Canadians. And if you write letters and you say things and you show up places, it's not, voting is vital, but it's everything that happens beforehand that determines their platform. And they are not hearing from most entrepreneurs and from most Canadians. And so the example I gave you
That is a better answer than just
No.
complain. Speak directly to your elected representatives in a reasonable fashion.
No, but I just want to say, like, the example I gave you is a case where the policy is well designed and well thought through, but once something, policies like anything else in the world, it needs to evolve over time. And so once it's out there, you need to be able to revisit it. And so they need the feedback to know, here's how you could make it better. And that's only going to happen if people tell them.
Thank you.
And from my vantage point, especially as the newly appointed lead for the Community-Centered Climate Innovation Research Priority at SFU, a large part of answering this question relates to an emerging methodology in academia called co-production or co-creation research, which really is a form of research of bringing policy practitioners, scientists and researchers, and relevant stakeholders together to frame relevant research questions and relevant policy questions, and to co-create the answers to these things and by doing so, and by including different actors in the policy building process or in the research framing process, you actually build and enable that pathway to implementation.
Amazing. So Amy had 2 questions. I'd be remiss if I didn't read out one of hers. So last question to all of you. How would you balance sharing and presenting nascent data to encourage development and collaboration and vetting possible technologies before scaling? Well, there's a lot in there. So there's sharing and presenting, so communicating what you have, but also vetting possible techs before scaling. Aislinn, did you have thoughts on this in terms of
Yeah, it's sort of on vetting possible technologies before scaling, which is one aspect of what we see a fair amount when we see startups and spin-offs going out. That generally the market will speak for itself, whether or not there are investors and interest and funding opportunities to bring those technologies to market. I will say that most things coming out of the university are early stage and generally have there's a nice ramp you can do within the university ecosystem to scale up. And so obviously that's all here, but yeah, use everything within the university that you've got for vetting your technologies. And generally, you can share your information. It's not as super secret as you think it is.
Oh, thank you. Did either of you have any thoughts on sharing while balancing that with?
I'll say the same point is that definitely don't be nervous about sharing your data, your early data. One thing to know, I think, certainly in the policy world, is that if you're a researcher and working at a university, your bar, the bar in your field for certainty before you can take an action is extremely high. It's higher than the world's, and it's certainly higher than policymakers. And so researchers make the mistake all the time of thinking they don't know something well enough in order to inform policymakers, and they probably do.
And this relates back to the co-creation piece of work that I was talking about, in the sense that it's actually better to bring nascent research into a forum with different actors to help shape it and co-frame it. And that's honestly, in my experience, the best way to ensure impact.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys. So I'm going to ask you to do 2 things in one. We have a minute left, and there's a question that says, that I actually wanted to ask but I didn't get to, which is, what's the biggest obstacle to converting research to impact? The first thing that comes to your mind, and then if you could just close out that statement with some form of hope. What does success look like in your eyes? Because we're in an emergency, but we got to keep living. Okay. Simon. Yeah.
The first thing that pops in mind, it's simple, it's just translation. We don't do it because researchers don't understand how companies work, how government works, et cetera, and vice versa. And bridging that gap, offices like yours does, are what we need.
Yeah, and I'd say definitely the translation and the persistence needed to take something from a really good research idea into impactful in the world. And you have to understand how much work that is and how much drive that takes. Entrepreneurs are a breed apart from researchers. Some people have both skills, but it's pretty rare. And both people should recognize that those are really useful skill sets.
But that's why ILOs and entrepreneurship at UBC programs are so vital to this piece. Amazing. Okay, Alison, close us out.
I would say the intermingling of facts and values in organizations. And so organizations have particular mandates, and often those mandates become barriers to broader thinking, more systemic thinking, and part of the goal is to broaden the way that our leadership is thinking about this problem. I often say, as long as climate change is thought of as an environmental challenge, it will remain a secondary consideration in organizations. It needs to get embedded into organizations as a social design challenge.
That fits right into our efforts into changing systems. I'm delighted. I'm delighted with how this chat turned into an amazing, like for me, super educational. I've got like more like notes than I have on printed on my page. I hope it was for you too. Thank you so much, Alison, Simon, and Aislinn for your time. Learned so much. Thanks very much.